Hello everyone. You're all very welcome to Science Gallery today for a very special event. We're going to be speaking to three people who have, for the last 20 years, been merging art and science in a brilliant and really unique way as part of the Science of Discworld series. So it's something that Science Gallery are really excited about, and it's a project that we're looking forward to hearing about. I guess to start off, we'll talk about the fact that this is 20 years of the Science of Discworld, and you know, it's a really unique way to do a science of book. Usually you would expect a science of book to be, go behind the story, but this is supported by a fictional narrative that is just incredible and a really, really nice way to explore the science behind something. And it's another lovely way in, which something that, you know, Science Gallery always tries to do, give people fresh new ways into science. So I think Ian is going to start off the event, and I'm going to talk as little as possible, you'll be pleased to know. And I look forward to hearing more about the Science of Discworld. Thank you.
Good. I'll talk and run the computer, and Jack and Terry will heckle and join in and take over. And welcome to the Dublin, the city of Science of Discworld. How can there be a Science of Discworld? Discworld runs on magic. Okay? So this is one way to make a world. Has all the ingredients. This is the sensible way to run a world. It's Discworld. It's flat, so things don't fall off. It's held up by 4 elephants, so that it doesn't fall. The elephants are held up by a turtle, so they don't fall. The turtle doesn't need to be held up, it's a turtle. It swims through space. So it all makes sense. It has a sun, which goes sensibly round the disk once a day, like any reasonable sun ought to. And of course, the elephants have to lift a leg, let it come by. And it's fairly close up, so the sun doesn't have to be incredibly hot. So it's much more energy efficient. And the oceans fall off the edge because it's flat, but they're magically recycled, so that's okay. So it never runs out of ocean. People live on it, and they always have. As any sensible, what's the point of having a world if you don't have people on it? And things happen because people want them to. This is called magic, or they happen because of the power of story. The story says they have to. This is called narrativium, narrative imperative. All of this means that everything makes sense. Yes, if things happen because something wants them to, if you start asking why did that happen, you have an obvious answer. So-and-so wanted it to. Or the story says it was going to. There is, however, another way to make a world. You recognise that one? This is the stupid way. And the more you think about it, the more you realise just how stupid round world, as we like to call it, is. I mean, the first thing it's got wrong is it's round, which means things fall off. Or at least they would, except there's this mysterious force. Gravity keeps everything just about attached. I mean, it's not very well attached. You can jump up and down. Unaided human beings can get about 6 feet off the ground. This means the people on the bottom are upside down. It's so big that it looks flat. You see, if you're really stupid, you might think it is flat, and that would make it a much more sensible sort of world. It's not supported by anything. How silly. It swims through space of its own accord, but it's not a spacefaring turtle, it's just a round sphere. Hasn't got any flippers, it's too dense to float. Doesn't make sense. It can't decide where to go, whereas a turtle knows exactly where it wants to go. So, round world, as it makes its way blindly through the universe, keeps banging into things. Like that. I mean, do you understand how improbable and silly our world is? It's got a sun, but it doesn't revolve around the disk around the world. Instead, the world revolves around the sun. It's got it back to front. And it does it once a year, not once a day. So why does the sun rise and set? It doesn't. The planet spins. So if you're really, really stupid, you think the sun goes round and round and it rises and setting. But then you have to make the gravity sums work out. You know, I'm a mathematician. You do the sums. The sun's gigantic, which means it's got to be a long, long way away, which means it can't be energy efficient. It has to be really, really hot. So there's all this, you're into nuclear fusion and quantum and all of these things, just to make this fudged up world work. Discworld, it works because people want it to. This one, it gets very, very mysterious. Okay? And it spins. Not quite like that, but it's the best graphic I can manage. Now, some of it's quite clever. The oceans don't fall off the edge because it hasn't got an edge. This is one of the few advantages of a round world. But instead, the oceans fall upwards because they evaporate. So they get magically recycled as well. So round world never runs out of ocean either. Now, there's no narrative imperative, so it doesn't know which axis to spin about. And actually, the axis slowly changes. This is because round world isn't quite sure what it should be spinning about. But it's got a moon, and the moon helps to stabilise the axis. So now you've added yet another. If this was a science fiction story, you say, oh, come on, there can't be all of these different things all happening. You're inventing too much. It doesn't make any kind of sense. It's populated by people now. We have a lot of evidence in this room. But for 99.98% of its existence, there weren't any people. There were mostly blobs. You learn a lot about blobs in Science of Discworld 1. Things do sometimes happen now because people want them to, but it's not magic, it's called technology. Mostly things happen because of mysterious rules, which we call science, which run somewhere in the background. But they don't look like anything that human beings understand. They mostly look like these formulas over here. Schrödinger's equation, for those of you who recognise it or don't. So absolutely nothing on round world makes the slightest sense until you puzzle out these strange rules. So, guess which of these two types of world we're living on? We know it's round world. So, that was kind of how we got started on writing the Science of Discworld series. Yes, Terry can interject.
What's the word I'm looking for? The word? Is it privative?
Privative, yes. Yes.
I think I was
Like
talking
death and darkness.
Yes, I was talking with Jack and Ian one day because these guys, I have to say, are scientists that like science fiction and like to hang out at conventions.
Yes.
Quite a lot, especially. And I learned the wonderful word privative. It's when your mum says, close the window, you're letting the cold in.
Yes. All the spread of ignorance.
Well, it makes sense. The window opens and it's colder inside. The cold must have come in.
Yes.
I did Discworld. I know how this works.
Yes. And death, of course, is a privative.
That's right. But, yes. On round world, the heat's getting out, of course.
Yes.
So we wanted to compare and contrast these two types of world. Discworld running on magic, narrative in, but not science. So how can you write the Science of Discworld?
We started we met in a Mongolian cafe, restaurant, and Terry brought us. Terry had reconstructed a book that we wrote called Figments of Reality, and had done a brilliant job, and it made sense afterwards. It's quite a good book now. But we had all the chapters, but we couldn't see the way they'd go. And Terry said, you do it like this. We did it like this. We met him to give him a copy of the book. And he came along with the science of Star Trek. And we bloody wept. It's horrible. It's all about, if you want to go faster than light, it's tachyons, and here's the equation. And Terry said, I played in your world, why don't you play in my world, or something like that. And we thought, well, we can't because there isn't any science. Then we began talking about Earth and primitives and one thing and another. And before you know it, we had Science of Discworld. The unseen university wizards create our universe by mistake.
And it makes absolute sense.
And it makes absolute sense, yes, absolutely.
After all, when people say, why is there a second type of light in Discworld? Well, how else would you be able to see the darkness?
Yes, that's right.
But it makes,
Yes. It makes a sense where if you live in a primitive world, that's what happens. You talk of the spread of ignorance and death.
Actually, I could say that the spread of ignorance is not a privative.
I feared you'd say that. Yes.
Think of Essex, for example. That is the spread of ignorance.
I fear so. All right, I give up. Yes.
All right. Yeah.
But I know what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I know what you
somehow the three of us, and we all have different theories about how it actually happened, but we realised that it had to be the case that the Discworld events were genuine Discworld events, and the round world science was genuine round world science, and those are two different worlds, and they do not coexist. So how do you handle it? Terry makes them coexist. So from outside, round world is this spherical TARDIS-like containment field, which is much bigger on the inside because it doesn't know how big it ought to be, because there's no narrativium to tell it how big it ought to be. But from the outside, it looks like a sort of pearlescent football or a bubble. From the inside, it's our planet, our universe. And that meant Jack and I basically could add very big footnotes to Terry's story.
Yeah.
So Terry wrote a kind of 25,000, 30,000 word Discworld short story with Discworld characters, Discworld events, some of them happening in round world, of course, but that's a Discworld construct from that point of view. And I think Terry was one of his great achievements was single-handedly to revive the use of the footnote. If you read even the earliest of the Discworld books, you will find footnotes. I was writing academic books, and my publishers were saying, you can't put footnotes in, because they didn't actually have the technology to handle it. I mean, now you can do it. You do it in Word, it has huge footnotes. Anyway, so Jack and I write very big footnotes, and they're not about Discworld at all. They're about round world science, real round world science, and sometimes
looked at from outside.
But looked out from these 2 points of view. You can look at things in terms of people making things happen and the sort of people-centred way of thinking, or you can look at it from the what are the underlying rules of the universe, and then it all gets very mysterious, but also rather interesting.
Yes.
So we could compare and contrast these two ways of thinking. So it's a lovely vehicle for talking not just about scientific facts. That's not really what science is about. I mean, it's nice to have we're fairly sure that probably the Earth is round and so forth. But it's not a list of facts. It's a way of thinking. And if you have a different way of thinking to contrast it with, and we could have done science and religion, and we did a chapter or two on that at times, but you can offend a lot of people if you contrast. You can offend both. You can have real fun and offend both. But if it's science versus magic, it's a little easier for everybody to kind of get the point. So Unseen University became the great vehicle for us because of the wizards. And
Terry privileged us.
That's right.
You
by
must,
making us wizards.
indeed. Yes, you ended up feeds in on that one, didn't you?
But
you have to remember that for the purposes of the game, the wizards actually create round world.
Yes.
You know, one of them finds some continuum lying around, stirs it up a bit, and next thing you have a world.
Well, actually, the dean puts his finger in.
Well, that's
and
right. Yeah.
There was quite a small bang from the outside.
Yeah. Well, there we are, you see.
And it really was started by
That's
an old
very
man with a
much
beard.
Yank
Yes,
Moore
it started
way.
with an old man with a beard, that's right.
Yes. Yes, in, as you know, in Unseen University, the health and safety thing runs like this. If it's unsafe and unhealthy, we'll give it a go. It's going to be very interesting.
Yes.
So there we have the wizards holding up round world. Okay, so then we had to actually decide what to put in our very big footnotes. You know, we got the structure, but then you still have to have content. So what sort of things should we talk about? Well, the obvious things to talk about, since it was about round world, was the shape of the planet. How do scientists know what shape the planet is? Okay? And this is a story we all get in school. This is something... You don't actually have to be fantastically intelligent to figure out it isn't flat. And the ancient Greeks could do this. So Eratosthenes measured the distance from Alexandria in the north of Egypt to what was then called Syene. It's now Aswan in the south. And he looked at the angle at which the sun was at midday. And in Aswan, it's directly overhead. In Alexandria, it was about 7 degrees off the vertical, which is roughly 1/50th of a circle. So Eratosthenes, being quite bright, said, well, I kind of know it's round, but I can work out how big it is now, because that means the distance from Alexandria to Syene is 1/50th of the circumference of the planet. How far is it from Alexandria to Syene? And the answer was something like 52 camel days.
Yes.
He had to ask the people who traded with the camel caravans and find out how long it took. And then think, well, a camel goes a certain amount per
Ian?
day.
Ian?
Yes?
Can I just interject something? A question to you, sir. He kind of knew it was round.
Yes, the Greeks were already convinced it was round.
What was convincing them?
Okay,
the shadow of the Earth on
the shadow of the Earth on
the moon.
the moon in eclipses.
So it wasn't just, I've got a funny feeling.
No.
Well, it's the Om story, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, the ancient Egyptians seem to have, in some ways, thought it was square, because you've got the 4 cardinal points. But if you live in Egypt, you think it's square, because the Nile runs
Chinese
north-south, and the sun comes up
Chinese
in the
as well.
east and sets in the west. So Egypt has these natural axes, and the whole of ancient Egypt revolved around this sort of natural coordinate system in which north, south, east and west are almost imposed upon the country.
Yes.
But the Greeks realised a whole pile of reasons. The other things like when a ship sails out to sea, you see the mast slowly disappearing beyond the horizon. And the Greeks were quite good at geometry. They thought, oh, that means it's curved. See? So the question for Eratosthenes was not actually what shape is it. He knew it was round. How big is it? That's a more interesting question. So it is actually recorded that he got a figure of so many thousand stadia. And the stadium is a unit of distance. The problem is nobody actually knows quite how long a stadium was. So the historians said, well, the Earth's the size it is, and so you can work backwards and you can work out what a stadium must have been. And then, of course, his result was amazingly accurate. Yeah, but it probably wasn't too bad. So we could talk about that kind of science, and we could mention, yeah, here's the geometry of it for you, you see. And it's even got the camels. It's a well in Syene. It is probably... I'm not sure what it is in Alexandria, actually. Some sort of monument. A couple of camels in between. And this is all you need to know. There are still people who are not convinced. And
We're
shown
talking
up
about that in Sod 4.
We are going to talk about this in number 4, yes, because the whole issue of intellectual property rights for round worlds is going to come up.
happen now, isn't it?
I'm afraid so.
And there are some opposing theories. Cyrus Teed, interesting gentleman, said, yes, it's round, but we're living on the inside. It's hollow.
Yes.
The sun's in the middle, and you have to do a certain amount of interesting machinations to make that actually fit together. But they're not so different. If you went back about 10 slides to when I was saying, well, round world, things will fall off the bottom, you've got to add gravity, you've got to have a moon, you've got to have other stuff. It's at least arguable that the number of ingredients that Mr. Teed needed to make his hollow earth theory work is not outrageously different from what we need for the one that people actually believe. But it does have
But you have
problems.
to be a mathematician to think like that, actually.
Yeah, and the problem is you can explain each bit individually, but when you put the whole explanation together, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And of course now, it's perfectly obvious what shape. It's basically a bowl cut in half. Except, of course, some of this could be fake.
And of course, Narrativium tells us that someone with a name like Cyrus Teed is going to be a bit of a dickhead. Well, it does, doesn't it? Cyrus Teed. You can only put Firefly at the end of it.
That's right. This is very true. Oh dear.
This is how it went on through many a stir-fry.
Yep.
And one of the questions, can I interject?
You can interject, Terry?
Was me asking, what is a scientist? And we had a lot of fun with that.
Oh, we did.
Oh, we had... Yes.
I can't remember which one it was in.
I think it was
number 2.
Yeah.
Number 2 in the Globe, which is by many ways the best one,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the one...
Had Shakespeare in it.
Yeah,
you know?
the first one we crammed too much in because we didn't know there was going to be a number 2. In fact, Terry had told us there wasn't going to be a number 2. Because number 1 was going to be so much fun that you could never... you shouldn't go back.
And we couldn't put enough in it. I mean, it's grossly overfull.
Yeah, it should have been 2 books.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah. So,
2
but
books
yes.
and more money.
So by that's right. But by number 2, we knew how to play the game, and we'd figured out that instead of 50 chapters with 25 from Terry and 25 from me and Jack, it should be about 12 or 13 chapters from each of us.
Yes.
Slightly more extensive essays. And we mapped it out, and in the middle was a bit where the wizards figure out what science is, and then Jack and I tell all
them
the
what it
readers
really is.
what science is. That's right. And we left those on the grounds, those would be very easy to write, so we'll do everything else first. So we did everything else, and we came to that bit, and Terry said, OK, what is science, really? And Jack and I said, well,
Yes.
And we discussed this, and eventually I started saying, I think what Terry latched onto, and he'll contradict me if this is false, but was 2 points. One is that, I'll tell it this way, I had a PhD student who was a very bright Portuguese woman mathematician. There are lots of women mathematicians in Portugal. And she came to me one day and said, I've been reading this paper that you and a couple of other people wrote, and I think it's incomplete, she said. I said, oh, we made a mistake, did we? No, but you say such and such, and I've been reading this other paper which has a similar list, but they've got an extra one. And I think you should add that to your list. You mean our list is missing one? Well, I think you should add that one. And eventually I got her to actually agree that we'd got it wrong.
Yeah.
And she was obviously a bit nervous telling me that we got it wrong. And I said, no, look, this is fantastic. You are now, you've actually earned your PhD at this point.
Right.
Yes.
Because you've come and told me something that I didn't know already.
Yes.
And it's something, OK, it happens to be that we screwed up, but that's... This is not unusual.
Of course
I said,
didn't.
but
It's science.
that's right. But you've got to do a little bit more than that. You've got to actually go to the United States, visit one of the other authors, talk to him about it as well, and figure out what we should have done.
Right.
Where did we go wrong, and what is the correct answer? Because maybe we didn't just miss one, maybe we missed a whole pile when we were listing these mathematical structures. Okay, so the point of this is the way you make your mark as a scientist is not by telling everyone else that you agree with them, it's by actually finding something where you disagree with them and then you prove you're right.
Yeah.
And scientists actually accept that. Not necessarily always as easily as my friend and I did. There's a certain amount of argument about it, but in the end, when the evidence mounts up, at some point, the scientist who's got it wrong will say, oops, sorry, okay, you've convinced me, I've got it wrong. So that was one thing. So that you should actually delight in proving other scientists wrong. And then I said, I was talking about something totally different. I've been working on animal movement. And I was telling Terry about experiments where they found out how insects moved their legs in what patterns by taking a little cylinder of metal, coating it in soot from a candle, and then spinning it underneath the insect. The insect sort of held in position on top of this thing. And as it spins, the insect moves its legs, and it makes little marks in the soot. Yeah. And Terry said, hey, now we could really do something with that.
Yes.
Because I'd also told him about the question of horse gaits.
I wonder how many of you have read Science of Discworld 2. Can you put your hands up? Okay. We're telling you things, most of you
think of the money we're going to get now.
Huh?
For the extra money we're going to get now, obviously.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
So
I'm thinking about that too.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, if you'd all read it, and then Ian was telling you this, it clearly wouldn't be news to you, but it is news to three-quarters of
it would actually, Jack, because it would be where it came from.
Right.
They'd know what came out of it, but they wouldn't know how it arose. Yeah, so the ingredients were, you make your mark by contradicting your mentor, unlike, let's say, an ancient Greek philosopher where you make your mark by proving that your mentor was absolutely correct, somebody like Aristotle. And in fact, Aristotle wrote some things about a horse trotting. And there was a question whether the trotting horse is completely off the ground. And Aristotle basically says it can't be, because if it was, it would fall over. Anyway, so Terry put all of this stuff together and ended up with a character who is a bit like Aristotle's research student, who is trying to prove his master is correct about the trotting horse. But instead of arguing deep philosophy, he does a rather crass thing, and he goes out and does an experiment to find out. And the experiment is like the insect experiment, but using a horse.
Yeah.
And they do everything. They move the horse across the sand, they move the sand past the horse. And I won't give away the punchline, but Terry took these sort of 2 or 3 little bits of discussion, turned it into this central chapter. And when we finished this, we looked at the result and said, you know, if we thought of that first, instead of assuming that chapter was going to be the easy one, the whole book would have been completely different.
Yeah.
So
It would have made a fine centerpiece to a different book.
But I was still saying, what is a scientist?
You were. And well,
And I think one of the things we did, I think that I think we left the wizards to it. They were helping us at this particular time.
yes,
And so they found out the names of some of the scientists.
yes.
And
They
so-
got Newton wrong.
Well, they turned up in Newton's laboratory in his period of his life, later in life, where he believed in effectively magic.
Yes, well, alchemy.
Well, that's alchemy, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think we ended
What?
up with. I think we ended up with you are a scientist if other scientists recognise that you are.
Yes. Yes, I think
right.
it's a very difficult concept. I've had something over 20 graduate students, and all of them changed my mind in some really rather serious connection.
Yep.
Each of them got their PhD, as it were, by changing the mind of their supervisor. And that's quite important.
Yeah, so the idea for number 2 was basically that getting Newton and Shakespeare born was the important thing to do, and the elves were interfering with Roundworld. And so Terry had a lot of fun. The Wizards of Unseen University tried to get Newton and Shakespeare born, and this turns out to be rather more difficult.
And telling Shakespeare the plot.
Yes.
Something which Doctor Who was happy to plagiarise a little bit later.
Yes.
Yes, we pinched quite a bit of the plot from the reason I put up this slide was that was where a lot of the inspiration came from. And then having come up with the problem is to get the right person born, we realised that for the 3rd book, so for Science of Discworld 3, I'm moving on because I want to open this up for some discussion at some point. Where are we going? In here somewhere. Oh yeah, here we go. So Science of Discworld 3, it wasn't a case of getting the right person born, that happened. It was getting him to do the right thing. And let me quickly... yes, okay. So, Roundworld is in trouble again. The wizards look after it because it's a bit like a pet gerbil. They feel responsible for it. They don't feel very responsible for it, but they don't like to see the poor thing getting into a real muddle. So, it's not the elves, something else is going on, but it's not, Roundworld isn't doing what it's supposed to do. And they know from the earlier books that it's heading for a big catastrophe and that people are going to have to be able to get off the planet using technology, but they're not heading in that direction anymore. And it turns out it's because in Victorian England, science and religion sort of cozied up to each other instead of having a ding-dong argument. And it was very nice and comfortable, and everyone felt great, it's fantastic. We all agree on everything. But it didn't have quite give the intellectual stimulus to the creation of science and therefore technology.
Yes.
And it was all to do with the Reverend Charles Darwin, who wrote a book about species, which everyone loved. It was a brilliant book. And it was called Theology of Species. Theology. And that wasn't the book that stimulated the discussions that led to the science that eventually led to the humans or whoever it was getting off Roundworld in time to avoid the Great Ice Age, which killed them all off. So the wizards have to get him to write the origin rather than the ology. And so the whole book is about Darwin not writing this book. Now, I sent Jack a kind of summary of this plot when we were trying to work out what to put in the book, because the way this works is it always starts out, when we get from book N to book N+1, it starts out just after book N's come out, and Terry says, that was great, and we're not going to do another one.
That's right, yes.
It's much too much, you just cannot match that. Followed at some delay by, if we did do another one, what would it be about?
Oh, yes.
Which is then a signal for Jack and me to put together scenario after scenario after scenario.
To see
and
which
Terry,
one turns Terry
no,
off.
that's no good. No, don't like that. Hang
But it's
on.
got to have narrativium.
That's
Yes.
right. It's got to have narrative.
The Darwin one was great.
Yeah.
Because we could take Darwin
Real history.
as a boy
Yeah.
and follow him along and see... narrativia came to my aid again, because all the way through Darwin's earlier life, the chances of there being not a young Darwin were turning up and just missing him.
Yeah, if you read
real history.
any of the biographies of Darwin, and you understand that the backdrop against which his life happened is this battle between the Wizards of Unseen University and unknown dark forces,
Yes.
trying to get him to write the book that he actually did, The Origin of Species. You look at his life and you say, that's a place where the Wizards interfered.
And then that's the place where the wizards interfered. Because there were so many.
Yeah, there's about 6 very obvious ones. He went to university, he studied theology, among other things. He had to read a slightly subversive book, which is
Natural theology.
Natural theology, which is about design in living creatures and how this proves the existence of God and so forth. And Darwin actually thought this was pretty good. And what he wanted to be was a country vicar.
And to play with natural history,
Yeah.
like country vicars did.
That's right. So, but then he didn't do that. So the Wizards obviously interfered at that point. And then when the job on the Beagle came up,
Yes.
Darwin applied for it and didn't get it. Because somebody else got the job instead. And then soon after that, the person who had got the job, his wife discovered it was a 3-year job and said, "You're not going on the ship for 3 years." It was actually 5. So suddenly the job came up again. So Darwin's father said, "You're not going to go on that ship." And then he paused and said, "Oh, unless some person of high standing advises me that you should go," which meant his Uncle Josiah of the Wedgwood family. And Uncle Jos said, "This will be the making of the young man."
Yeah.
And so on. So, and then Darwin was absolutely seasick.
That's right.
At the start of the voyage. And when they put in at the first island, it's quite clear he was going to jump ship and go home because it was such a wretched experience. But when they got there, there was
smallpox.
It was cholera, I think.
It was cholera, yeah.
There was a cholera outbreak, so he couldn't leave the ship. And by the time he got to the next possible stopping point, he discovered he come up with a theory for the origin of Coral Islands.
Coral Islands, yeah. And he wanted to see some more of them,
right.
and he found high shells on one of the islands, and couldn't understand how they got there, and was really puzzled by this, and that overcame his bloody seasickness. I can't imagine how. I'm desperately seasick myself.
Well, he solved the seasickness problem by spending most of the voyage on land.
Yes.
And remember that while on land, he was doing dangerous things. He was galloping horses and across the veldt and everything.
Right. And being involved in several little wars.
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
But did a cannonball pass through the rigging of their boat?
Yes.
At one point.
That's right.
So this is the battle between good and evil happening,
all the time.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant bloody book. You should read it.
Well, so
Number 3.
Well, actually, it had me reading. I went and read Origin of Species for this, and I'd read it when I was a kid. It was the thing that turned me on. Mr. Lisa. Every now and again, in your life, probably a school teacher is going to give you the book that did the job.
Yeah.
I remember reading through that, and I had, shortly afterwards, I had something which kept me in bed, I can't remember, and made me slightly hallucinogenic. And I read...
you haven't grown out of that, of course.
No, and so I read the book, and... Yes, it's probably stayed with me all this time. I'm sure about that. And I thought, this is right. This is actually what it is. And actually, now in my garden, which is quite large, we have a bank. It's Darwin's Bank. I'm trying my best to do Darwin's Bank. And again, even in the, and that was even when I was writing the bit we did at the end, where the wizards are even then trying to make him see that the bank is there.
We'll open up for questions. Okay, I think looking at the time, we still have somewhere between 10 and 25 minutes to go, depending on when we end, but at some point you will be allowed to escape. But we have some Science Gallery team members going with mics.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, just raise your hand.
Yeah.
And now's probably a good time to mention as well that there won't be a book signing afterwards, but if you'd like to pick up any of the Science of Discworld copies, they're available down the front.
I don't mind doing. Well, have we got? It's probably someone's going to tell me we haven't got enough time. Is that it?
We'll stay tuned and we'll figure out if there's going to be a book signing.
We'll see what
afterwards.
we can do.
We'll do something.
Anyway, I think we had the most fun was on that. The first and the last. Well, third.
The middle one was the best one.
Yes. Well, there you go.
They're all three pretty.
Because
good.
the point is also, the two of them had to explain everything to the dummy.
Yes.
And that made it more interesting.
This man knows more than anybody I know.
Well,
Call him a dummy.
well,
It's totally wrong. But he can play the dummy.
but it gave me
beautiful.
But you see, it gave me the wonderful things like Rincewind actually on our planet.
Yes.
And think, oh dear, it goes through catastrophes. Oh dear. The sky is burning again.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, any questions? We'll throw it over to discussion.
If we're not having any questions, should I say something about this Science of Discworld 4?
Oh yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, we're kind of in the middle of Science of Discworld 4, and we've got a kind of recurring theme, which is from Greg Benford, well-known science fictionist and physicist, who suggested that there are two ways of looking at the world. One way is to see it as people-centered. That is to say, the important things are all about people. And God created the world and created it for people, and animals are there to use, and the earth is there to use, and so on. But you needn't believe in God and have that attitude. You could still have the attitude that talk to many economists, and they will believe that the world rotates around economics and people. Alternatively, you may believe that the people are an entirely, well, pretty nearly irrelevant speck on the outside of a tiny little ball of dust, going in a totally insignificant solar system, in a not very important galaxy, among 200 billion galaxies. And that really, such importance as we attach to ourselves is given to us within a universal context. And it's very cute to be able to get one side and the other side of this argument, to start parochial with people or to start universal. And it doesn't sound like that when we do it, I promise you. But we have a nice lot of tricks that come from that. Any questions now? Yes, we have one there. No, there are microphones.
There are roving microphones.
So this is totally unrelated to the Science of Discworld, but I'm sure a lot of people are wondering it. Is there going to be any more from Vimes on the Watch?
Well, Snuff was pretty good, and I've got to leave it some time before I do another one, because otherwise I'm just doing police procedurals all the time. If there was quite a few more of me, that would be rather helpful. At the moment, I've got to think about this. I've got to think because, God help us, the long Earth has gone to number 1, and we were hoping that we were going to do a sequel, and now we most definitely are. Right. So I'm going to have to bang on with that. And these guys want something done, and, sometimes I have to sleep, you know what I mean? I like doing it, but you can get, Jack and I were commiserating about being old men recently. I'm
a lot older than him.
Yes, but you haven't got Alzheimer's.
No.
And mine is very slow, and you can't really notice it unless I tell you. But once you get over 60, you start getting tired a little more easily.
I believe that. And the amount that you've done, the amount.
I want to do it.
Done.
My attitude is you can't die if you have a book in progress. It's actually not allowed. Colin believes that.
I hope so.
Tell that to Robert Jordan.
Well, the trouble is you've now gone from... you had a universe of your own, which most of us don't. Now you've got 2 of them.
Well, one of them is part shared, you know?
Yeah.
But that's not
One
half
and a
a
half.
universe. It's not half a universe you have. It's another whole universe.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, no, even a whole number of universes.
When is the long Discworld going to happen?
Oh, God, that would get... There's only so many crimes that I can put in.
Yes.
I think we have another question up the back.
How you doing? I was just wondering, in the event that humanity escapes round world in this cataclysmic scenario, does the space around the world start expanding? Does space start appearing because they believe that they're going into space, or do they go and live on the desk in the laboratory that they're in?
Okay.
One of the things I think I'd like to say
Yeah.
is that it's because we take the human view, that's human-centric. It's because within the lifetime of your grandchildren, at least, there will be great wars over everything, because we are running out of so many things. And we are rather stupid. We're never, ever going to have a world government. The USA will never agree, would it? Well, nor would China. I mean, I'm being serious about this. We don't think as a species. We think as
Individuals.
citizens, mostly, or individuals. And it's taken us a very long... I've once heard, quite a few years ago, an old lady saying she wasn't going to use dishwashing powder because of the planet. And up until that point, because she was my grandmother, I thought, she's never really thought she's been on the planet. She's never needed to bother about it. But now, some washing up powder, which apparently wasn't any good, for the environment. Yeah, and suddenly that she was going to save the planet by not using it. But we are using up resources. Those resources.
We are warming things up far too much.
Yes, and some of those resources will come back again, but you're going to have to wait for absolute millennia when it comes back. And you won't like the way it comes back because that's going to be awfully hot.
Yes.
And we really are not doing that much about it.
To talk about the time when your lady was using the right detergent, I think it's very cute that earth used to mean soil, and now earth means the planet. And it happened in my lifetime, that change of usage.
You've just designed Science of Discworld 5.
I think Nicola has a question here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just a quick answer to that question. The fiction that we have is that what happens inside Round World from the Round World point of view is what we think is happening in this universe today. So yes, so it is expanding inside, not on outside, of course. It might well be expanding because when the original finger went in and it sparked off the explosion. That left some characteristics. We haven't really explored that. But, everything that's happening inside should look like what is really happening, if that makes sense. I mean, the expansion of the universe and the acceleration of the expansion are pretty widely believed by cosmologists and indeed by non-cosmologists these days. There's good evidence for that. A lot of the explanations for that are not greatly believed by anybody,
Yes.
and are certainly very provisional. So I don't know what's happening inside Roundworld, but I know what the scientists of Roundworld think is happening inside Roundworld.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the story we tell in that part of the book.
Nicola?
I'm utterly delighted to hear that Long Earth is going to be followed by Long Earth 2. That's going to be brilliant. I was just...
Longer Earth.
Longer Earth, yes, or Long Earth in another direction. But I was just thinking, Terry, if you were so turned on by the origin of species, even as a child, as a boy, what led you not to go and become a zoologist or a biologist rather than a writer? Or possibly a zoologist, biologist first and then a writer?
Too much science fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, it will take control of your daughters and sons. Mostly your sons, but sometimes your daughters. And I mean, I have to tell you, it's a secret, a very big secret. I talk to my computer. I can. Talking point and Dragon Dictate together with a little bit of treating make it very easy for me to do my first draft. But I get kind of annoyed at the technology people. We've had computers for a very, very long time, and they have been very, very cheap.
For a long time.
They're getting cheaper and cheaper. So that incredibly powerful computers I would have actually killed my grandmother to get. Well, I mean, she was old anyway, creaking door, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've got more computing power in my office than the whole world had. Actually, probably not that long ago, and yet we aren't doing.
You're not doing miracles.
But it's computing games, porn, social media, and all kind of other stuff is happening. There's so much other stuff. For example, because I nagged at the talking point people, now I finish my work, I just say to the open air, save work, or save work and shut down, or save work and restart, or something like that. We're actually fitting it up so now that when I actually go into my office in the morning, the computer will line up but start up even when I'm turning the key in the lock, and so the ratchet thing will actually come up just as I get there.
Lovely.
And I also, I want the computer to talk back to me. It's possible.
Yeah.
It's quite easy too. We're taking the technological path, but we're not really using much technology.
Yes. Mm-hmm. We're not going to the places in science fiction where we bloody well ought to be going. That's the thing. The spaceship has Eliza there, and you get on board. You say, "Right, Eliza, do everything."
But that should.
Right.
I can, because my computer is attuned to me. I can actually talk to it from anywhere, but you need an awful lot of other stuff to make real things happen. But what does cheer me up is now there are people around. There was a little while ago, it wasn't too long ago, there was one stupid woman she was an actress, and she said, "I hate space. What has space done for us?" And I was going, well, like everything. Like that now, these days, if you have something the size of an old-fashioned cigarette pack, you never ever need to get lost anywhere. That's longitude. in a nutshell.
Yeah.
All these things. You can phone anyone else in the world. Arthur C. Clarke actually said before 2001 came out that by the time it came out, it might be possible with a large enough briefcase to be able to phone someone with a large enough briefcase on the other side of the world.
Yes.
By the time it turned up, everyone had mobile phones.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
And it's going very fast, and you can now do so many things. You get the social media. You're getting. We actually.
It's going the wrong way, though.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. We're hearing some of the things that Larry Niven was talking about. Flash crowds.
Yes.
Absolutely, flash crowds.
Yes,
Um,
they're starting to happen.
Real science fiction ideas are coming into place. There was a whole lot of people in Trafalgar Square when we were launching the Long Earth, because we just did it over the air. We could be doing so much with the stuff, but we don't. We seem to. It's now coming back into a kind of basic form of entertainment and stopping right there, and the rest of it is left to the people that just use it for doing the typing.
Well, the
That's
same
a bit
thing
of a
happened to
rent.
Marconi. He wanted records to be for recording the last words of important people. And he didn't want it to be used for music at all. You know about
Much
that?
too frivolous.
Much
yes.
too frivolous, yes. He took in the money, all right, but
Okay, so,
he,
so you walk into the deathbed with the recording device and a gun.
I like that, yes.
This won't hurt a bit.
We have another question from the audience.
You were saying about the possible fourth book. Do you think it's ever possible to marry the two viewpoints of someone's egocentric view, and because the only other view we have of the world is of the world excluding me. We always talk about the people or the world, but it never includes yourself. Is there any way to marry that, those 2 points?
I think that's a very interesting question because
It is.
As a human being, if you adopt exclusively either of those two ways of thinking, you're in trouble. Neither of them does the whole job. And some way of integrating them.
Yeah,
Jack-
or alternating them.
Yeah, Jack and I have this, we use the word complicity for this kind of thing. Not quite in the usual dictionary way, but complicity is where two things come together and they don't just interact with each other, but they keep
Changing each
the interaction goes on and they keep changing each other, and what emerges from them is actually, it transcends them both. And it would be fantastic if it were possible to do that with those two ways of thinking, because both have merits. One of the things we don't do is say, oh no, this the sort of the science one is good and the other one isn't. No,
Yeah.
they both have merits in their own in the right circumstances. The important thing is to recognise the distinction, which is perhaps the first tiny step. At least once you know they're different, you stop saying there's only one way to think about these
Yes.
things. And
Yes.
so, I don't think we're there yet. This is the. We were discussing this last night. You said it was John Brunner. We are halfway between ape and human.
Yes.
Well, we told ourselves that we are Homo sapiens. No one ever came down with a stamp
No.
and
Yes,
said
that's
Homo
right.
sapiens.
Yes, well,
right.
in the second book, we say we're Pan Narans, the storytelling ape, and we make a good story about that.
But it's a story we want to see, not the story of what is true.
Yes.
I don't know what is true. I'm reliving an experience I had when I was about 15, when my grandfather took me into his study to give me a really serious talking to, because I had spent £50 on a pair of angelfish, which were very rare then. I thought I was going to breed them. And one died. And £50 was a lot of money. My mother was earning £2 a week as a machinist. £50 was a lot of money. And I had spent this, and then I bought another one. And my grandfather took me in to his study, and he said something which I've always remembered since for being silly biology, but it's actually desperately deep. He said, "Jackie, are you going to be a queen bee or a wasp?" Now, it's bloody silly biology. But what he meant was, were you going to have the big view or the little view? Do you see that? And at the time, I was training to be a rabbi. And I'd just given up. I'd just read Spinoza and felt that being a rabbi wasn't big enough for me, in a way. And I bred the angelfish and made a lot of money out of them. And became a queen bee and not a wasp, in that sense. But I had always remembered it as being a silly little phrase. Are you going to be a queen bee or a wasp? And we got giggles around the audience. Because his biology is crap. But the central thought there is the same one as, what's his bloody name?
John Brunner.
John
We reckoned.
Or the physicist.
Gregory Benford.
Gregory Benford.
Yep.
It's the universal or parochial view.
I think we have a few more questions. We'll just take this one from the front first.
Hi, my question is sort of an observational question on what you were saying about what defines a scientist. Now, if you think about it in a strange way, and I know this sounds strange, but isn't a scientist a person who does something completely unnecessary to prove something is necessary?
Scientists don't prove anything. They never prove something.
But they like to think they have.
But they think they do.
Sometimes.
There are forms of words which are honoured in the breach as much as in the observance. But
is this the difference between mathematics and biology now that we're...
well, Jack and I spent years coming to terms with that. Mathematics and biology, certainly if you go back to the late 1980s, 1990 or so, which is when we met, these were subjects that did not actually get on with each other terribly well. They still don't get on fantastically well, but they get on a lot better than they did, and the younger biologists particularly are much more prepared to tolerate mathematicians and mathematical thinking, even in biology. But Jack phoned me up out of the blue. We'd never met, because he'd read Does God Play Dice and was interested in chaos, but couldn't see how the mathematics of chaos could work if living creatures were organised. And he said, could he come and talk to me about it? And we went to the pub for lunch, and 4 hours later we were still sitting in the pub talking away. And what we'd discovered was that although on the points of detail mathematicians and biologists seem to have completely different views of almost everything, there were some more general questions on where we had identical experiences and very similar views. I mean, it's a simple one being, what do you do if you've got a PhD student who doesn't seem to grasp that they're supposed to be original? This happens in maths and it happens in biology, and there were sort of more significant versions of the same thing. So we realised that on the right level, most of the differences we thought were there kind of disappeared.
They evaporated. In that 4 hours, they evaporated. We produced a paper in that 4 hours, and the embryo of our book, Collapse of Chaos. And we had different stances, but we both thought the same questions were important. It was the most interesting 4 hours of my life, really.
There's time for one last question if anyone wants to have a go. No pressure, it's just the last one.
Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and in Round World, according to the Science of Discworld, we eventually get in our little tin cans and fly away. Would you ever look at the Science of Discworld from the other direction, the Round World scientists finding the wizards and using technology to try to determine magic?
Well, Greg Benford, the same Greg Benford, said, if it isn't like magic, it's not sufficiently advanced. Well, that's right. You turn on a light, which is magic. It's an advanced technology.
For most people in the world, that's magic.
Oh, you got the piece then?
Yep. Yes.
Yes, that's all right. Magic. Look, magic is real. It's around us all the time. It's mostly called technology. When I bought a Rambler car when I went to the States in 1963, there was a bit of magic there. Up till then, I had a Rover at home, and I used to have to put a heater under the... In cold weather, I put a heater under the engine, pulled out the choke, retarded the ignition, and then pulled the starter to get to start in the winter. And it took a hell of a lot to get to start. There was a piece of magic in the Rambler car. It was a note written down, a spell, cold start. And you pulled it, and a minute later, the car engine started. All right, that was the spell. And
now you just get in and start it.
yes,
It's an even better spell now.
yes, it's an invisible spell now.
Once you've got humans in Round World, they start to turn it into Discworld. And of course, this is why the Discworld series makes so much sense to the inhabitants of Round World.
I hate to be the one. I think everyone here would agree with me that I could sit here and listen all day to this conversation. It's been incredible to have the three of you here at Science Gallery, and I, for one, am very excited about Science of Discworld 4. Ladies and gentlemen, please
I better write the bloody thing down.
please join me in thanking everyone.